A retired veteran was fined for hanging peaceful wind chimes on his porch, his only comfort after losing his wife. The charge came from HOA enforcer Karen, who called them audio pollution and made it her personal mission to silence him. But Hal had a lifetime of sound engineering and friends in all the right places. Just wait until you hear how he turned the entire neighborhood into a symphony of justice. On the quiet, tree-lined curve of Cypress Hollow, a sleepy cul-de-sac tucked into the heart of Maple Glen, 67-year-old Harold Hal Bishop began his mornings like clockwork. He'd brew a single cup of dark roast, settle onto the porch swing with the newspaper folded just so, and listen to the wind play through the bamboo chimes hanging under the eaves. Each note was warm and weightless, a low wooden shimmer that drifted on the breeze. They weren't just decorations. They were Hal's piece. His wife had picked them out years ago during a trip to the coast. After she passed, they became more than just a sound. They were memory. Hal never imagined that something so small, so gentle, could become a target. The knock came at 6:45 a.m. on a Monday. Sharp, measured. Not a neighborly tap, but the kind of knock that meant trouble. Hal opened the door in his robe, blinking against the morning light. There stood Karen Devlin. Clipboard, sunglasses, a crisp lemon-colored blouse with the HOA emblem stitched over her heart like a badge of honor. Karen was the self-appointed sheriff of suburbia, the head of the HOA Compliance Committee, a title she wielded like a sword. She didn't say good morning. "Mr. Bishop," she began, her tone clipped, "we've received a complaint about your wind chimes. They're in violation of Section 4B, auditory disruptions that compromise community tranquility." Hal stared at her, then turned slightly to glance at the quiet porch behind him. No one else was awake. The houses nearest him were empty this time of year, snowbirds mostly, and the nearest active neighbor lived a full lot away. "My wind chimes?" he repeated, baffled. "They disturb the architectural serenity of the block," Karen replied, shifting the clipboard like it was a courtroom exhibit. "We strive for balance here, predictability, harmony." Hal raised an eyebrow. "Did someone complain?" Karen paused, then offered a smile so tight it looked painful. "I did, and that's enough." Before he could respond, she was already walking away, heels clicking sharply on the concrete. The next morning, the sun wasn't even fully up when Hal found the notice taped to his garage. Bright orange, impossible to miss, duct-taped in all four corners like a construction warning. HOA citation, non-compliant ornamentation, fine, $250, compliance required within 24 hours, escalating actions to follow. He stood there for a long moment, the paper fluttering in the wind. The chimes weren't even moving. The air was still. He hadn't even gotten his coffee. Hal took them down, not because he feared the fine or believed the complaint had any merit, but because after decades in uniform and a lifetime spent choosing his battles wisely, he knew when to step back and regroup. Still, as he unwound the strings from the chimes, his fingers trembled, not from age, but from something sharper, colder. The chimes barely rustled as he carried them inside, but in his chest, something rang out loud, quiet fury. He placed them gently on a shelf in his den, as if they'd been wounded, but he had underestimated Karen's appetite for control. The very next morning she returned. This time, she didn't knock. She stood at the edge of his lawn, with her phone raised, slowly panning across his garden beds like she was filming evidence. The camera paused on his porch, on the exact spot where the chimes had once hung. Then, she left. 2 days later, an HOA letter arrived, typed and certified. Follow up on prior violation. Possible ongoing non-compliance. Recommendation for continued monitoring. Hal was stunned. The chimes hadn't made a sound since he'd taken them down. They hadn't even moved. But Karen, it seemed, had developed a new theory. She accused him of visual non-compliance, claimed that merely seeing the wind chimes inside his house through a screened window constituted a repeat offense. It would have been laughable if it hadn't been written down and mailed with a signature. Word started to spread. Miss Weller from across the street had always liked the chimes. She'd once called them soothing, like the wind had something kind to say. A few others whispered their agreement when they passed Hal on walks. Some left nods. One even gave a small thumbs up behind a closed car window. But no one spoke up in public. Karen had a reputation. Since taking over the HOA's compliance committee, she'd fined 6 people for lawn gnomes, 4 for mailbox flags, and 1 for putting a child's swing in a front yard tree. No one wanted to be next. At the next HOA meeting, Karen stood before the room like a general on a stage. She proudly announced that she had restored auditory harmony to Cypress Hollow, eliminating rogue chime contamination from the soundscape. Some clapped. Others looked down at their papers. That night, Hal didn't go inside right away. He sat on the porch, where the chimes used to be, letting the dark settle around him like dust. The wind came and went, brushing past the empty hook. And for the first time since he'd moved into Maple Glen, it didn't carry music, only silence. And somehow, it was louder than anything else. Hal may have looked like a quiet, silver-haired man, with too much time and not enough fight left in him. But that was just the surface. What the HOA didn't know, what Karen didn't know, was that Hal Bishop had spent over 3 decades as an acoustics technician for the U.S. Army Band Corps. He had traveled the world, tuning cathedral bells in Italy, troubleshooting instruments aboard naval carriers, and overseeing sound installations for military ceremonies that were heard from Arlington to Ankara. He didn't just understand sound, he commanded it. And Hal had kept in touch. Former students, former colleagues, former soldiers. Some were now composers. Some taught music theory. Some sat on city boards. One, as it happened, was now the director of community outreach for the Maple County School of Music. So Hal made a phone call. By the end of the week, he'd proposed a pilot program called Arts in the Neighborhood, focused on bringing music installations to public green spaces. It was a perfect fit. An educational enrichment initiative that highlighted local student composers and gave residents access to passive cultural experiences. The city loved it. The school board approved it unanimously. The neighborhood council, eager for a positive press, fast-tracked it. And the location, the small, unused triangle of lawn right under the HOA's carved wooden welcome sign. A publicly accessible space that happened to sit right at the center of Cypress Hollow. 2 weeks later, just as Karen distributed a new round of aesthetic compliance reminders, a flatbed truck rolled in on a bright Saturday morning. Behind it followed a certified musical engineering crew with city permits in hand and concrete foundations already mapped. They installed a 7-foot bronze Carillon. It was breathtaking. 12 hand-cast bells polished to a gentle sheen, standing proud in a brushed steel frame. The tones had been tuned by a master bell maker in Vermont. At precisely 8 a.m. and again at 6 p.m., the Carillon would play a rotation of musical pieces composed by Maple County's advanced music students, ranging from soft classical arpeggios to meditative modern harmonies. It wasn't just beautiful, it was loud, not obnoxious, not intrusive, but undeniably present. It rang across the cul-de-sac with dignity and pride, echoing through the same air Karen had tried to claim. Most importantly, it was legal, fully approved, protected. The HOA had no say, no vote, no clause they could invoke. It wasn't Hal's property. It was a city installation, backed by 2 government departments and a local arts grant. Any attempt to remove it would trigger a press inquiry, and likely cost the HOA its community standing. Hal didn't gloat. He didn't need to. He simply stood nearby on his porch, hands behind his back, as the first morning chimes rang out across the neighborhood, bold and clear. They rang louder than any wind chime he'd ever owned, and every note told the same story. You tried to silence me, now hear this. Karen Devlin did not take the unveiling well. By Monday morning, she had already scheduled an emergency appearance at the next town council meeting. Dressed in a blazer too sharp for the room and holding a printout of the city's music grant policy, she launched into her speech. She accused Hal Bishop of weaponizing sound, of turning the neighborhood into an unsolicited concert venue, and her most dramatic phrasing yet, of creating sonic harassment under the guise of culture. But the room didn't lean her way. Council members shuffled papers. One cleared his throat. Another quietly pointed out that the Carillon stood on a public access green patch, not HOA-controlled land, and that its installation had been approved not just by city ordinance, but with matching education funds and endorsement from the school board. Everything had been reviewed, documented, and signed off in triplicate. One councilwoman leaned forward gently and said, "Miss Devlin, it's a community bell. It's quite literally in harmony with local values." Then came the newspaper article. A local reporter had covered the ribbon cutting, students standing proudly beside their compositions, families taking photos, and Hal in the background, quietly listening as the first song played out over Cypress Hollow. The article titled it, "A Sound That Binds Us, Local School Partners with Veterans to Celebrate Harmony in Maple Glen." That headline did more than validate the project. It sealed it in public opinion. By the time the clip aired on the evening news, people across the county had heard about the Carillon and the veteran who'd helped bring it to life. When a young reporter later asked Hal what inspired him, he paused for a moment, looking out across the lawn where the bell tower now stood. Then he said with a quiet smile, "Some people try to silence you. Others teach you to make a better sound." It was one sentence, but it traveled. Within a week, Karen's usual circle began to shrink. Her newsletter complaints got fewer responses. A petition she circulated against ambient bell disturbances received exactly 2 signatures, hers and her husband's. And when she tried to propose a new decorative sound policy at the next HOA meeting, she was met with silence. By the end of the month, Karen resigned from the board. No speech, no final statement. Her last written complaint, claiming the morning bell music was interfering with her meditation regimen, was met with a single courteous reply from the council clerk. "We encourage the use of noise-canceling headphones.